Welcome back to the channel and to my review of Chrono Cross the Radical Dreamers Edition on Nintendo Switch, which released on April 7th. Is this remake of the 1999 Square Enix classic worth your time? Let's find out. First, let me assure you, this is a spoiler-free review. I will be doing an in-depth story review separately from this video. That said, I will give you just a few general ideas and thoughts on the story later on to help you decide if this game is for you. But for now, the combat and leveling system takes a hard turn from the system present in the first game in the series, Chrono Trigger. While Trigger had a traditional leveling system and an active battle system that took place in the world rather than a separate battle screen, Chrono Cross uses star levels and a stamina-based battle system that does occur on separate battle screens. While the different combat style could be a sticking point for Chrono Trigger fans looking for a familiar system, it holds up well on its own and is a great system in its own right. Each attack you use will use up some of your 7 stamina points, and using an element will use 7 stamina points and can actually make you go into negative stamina if you had less than 7 points when you used the element. This creates some interesting tactical scenarios where you have to decide if using an element is worth that character being unable to act for an extra turn. The element system itself is also a masterstroke of tactical gameplay. As you use normal attacks during a battle, you will build up element levels. These element levels are then used to cast elements up to and including the level you have built up to. If you use an element of a lower level than you have built up to, you get to keep the difference in element level. You determine what elements to equip each character with by using their element grids. All elements have a base element level they can be slotted to, but most will give you a plus or minus range where they can be equipped to higher or lower levels. Doing so will either net them an increase or decrease in effectiveness. The way vulnerability to certain elements and the character's innate elements works is something quite unique as well. Instead of your typical rock, paper, scissors type of vulnerability mix, Chrono Cross uses an opposites system, for lack of a better term. Black elements are strong versus white elements and vice versa. Red is opposite blue and yellow is opposite green. This can make party composition tricky because your first thought for fighting an enemy who has blue as their innate element would be to use an innate red character, but that could lead your character to taking extra damage from the blue elements that enemy is likely to use. The trick is usually to equip your party with red elements in this case, but do not use a character who is red innately. However, a character who uses elements matching their innate color will do extra damage with those elements. This unique system forces the player to come up with rather unique strategies and spend time reorganizing their character's element grids to overcome some of the more difficult bosses. Speaking of bosses, I mentioned how the leveling system was different, and this is how. You only gain a star level by defeating bosses. That's right, grinding and fighting normal enemies is, honestly, mostly a waste of time. I say mostly because you do still get small stat increases for the characters in your party when you defeat regular enemies in between star levels, but these increases will not apply to any characters you are not using at the time. Gaining a star level after a boss fight, though, will apply stat increases to all of your characters, even the ones you do not yet have. The only real reason to fight regular enemies would be for crafting materials and for money. This system has its pros and cons. Since enemies appear on the map and there aren't any random battles, you can choose to avoid most fights, especially since this remake version of the game lets you turn off battles with normal enemies if you wish. Doing this lets you play through the game, explore, and get to the next story bit rather quickly. However, on the flip side, you cannot grind for more levels and get yourself over-leveled early on. This takes some of the agency from the player and makes you play the game at the relative strength level that the developers wanted you to be at. Everyone will have their own opinion on this, but for me, I like the option to just plow ahead and not be bogged down by constant, meaningless, and unchallenging battles, though the lack of challenge in the regular battles could also be looked on as a negative as well. The boss fights in the game, however, do offer a decent challenge. This challenge comes mostly in the form of mastering the combat and element system, as once you find the right combination of elements and characters to use in a particular boss fight, that fight will become much easier. There are a few bosses that can throw you off though, as they may have a unique quality to them that you will need to learn in order to beat them. The next gameplay element, exploration, is done very well. Once you get through the early sections of the game, the map will open up when you receive a boat and can now explore the islands of El Nido to your heart's content. Exploring the varied environments will reveal many secrets and treasures to be found, and the game is full of optional content. Like Chrono Trigger before it, Chrono Cross has content that, while optional, can lead to a different ending if you complete it. During exploration, you will also come across many puzzles that must be solved to advance the story or side quest. I found these puzzles to be varied enough to remain interesting, and also not so hard as to be frustrating. Solving the puzzles was an overall satisfying experience. You can also find up to 45 playable characters in the game, most of them being optional pickups. While it is fun to find all these different characters and to see how each performs in battle, the development of most of these characters is lackluster at best. Each one is given a short backstory, and at least some have optional content associated with them, but nothing really made me care much about any of the characters besides Surge and Kid, which the game fleshes out much better than the rest of the cast. Finally, moving into the story. While the story will start out rather slow and generic, all I can say is stick with it. At the end of the early game, it will start to pick up, and by the mid-game, it will be blowing your mind. At the end game, you will be thoroughly confused, but in a good way, if that makes sense. You will be trying to wrap your head around a story that, on its surface, is convoluted and seems to have too many moving parts. This is where having played Chrono Trigger will come in handy. The story tackles a lot of complex themes, and once I fully grasped it, I found it to be the best part of this game and my primary reason for playing it through. All things considered, a great story, unique combat system, but a lack of deep character development for most characters, leads to a gameplay score of 8 out of 10. Now let's take a breather, and let me know if you're enjoying this video by clicking that like button. Thanks! The graphics in Chrono Cross, the Radical Dreamers Edition, are phenomenal. Not so much in the graphical fidelity, though the character models do look much improved over their originals, but in the art style and visuals. All the hand-drawn environments are so beautifully done and give almost a storybook feel, and the addition of the 3D character models brings each environment to life. Though I will say it took some getting used to moving around in these environments, as sometimes it isn't always clear what areas you can walk on or access. The original CGI cutscenes are all still here and hold up surprisingly well. While none of these are voiced, they do a good job of visual storytelling and transfer some of the original game's charm to this remaster. Overall, I really enjoyed the graphical style in Chrono Cross, and it scores 9 out of 10 for the graphics. If you have played Chrono Trigger, many of the melodies in Chrono Cross will seem familiar. A few may be the same from Chrono Trigger, but most are unique renditions with familiar undertones. The music sets the tone very well in every scene and area you explore. From the ominous and foreboding to the light and cheerful, every melody was beautifully composed. The one disappointing aspect of the sound, though, comes from the battle scenes. There is only one battle theme, and hearing it over and over again, it begins to grate on the ears. A few battles in the game will use different music that helps set unique tones for those battles, and while this is much appreciated, it doesn't happen often enough. This fact brings down the sound score slightly to an 8 out of 10. Chrono Cross is technically a sequel to Chrono Trigger, but for all intents and purposes, the story is the only thing that links it to the first game. And even this link takes a while to become realized. The gameplay, other than lack of random battles, is completely different from that of Chrono Trigger. I can understand how many Chrono fans were disappointed with Chrono Cross when it first came out. However, Chrono Cross is a great game on its own if you can accept the differing style. But then we come to another conundrum. If you haven't played Chrono Trigger, or are at least familiar with its story, I think you'll have a harder time fully appreciating Chrono Cross's story. My recommendation for anyone considering picking this one up would be this. If you have played Chrono Trigger and or Chrono Cross before, this remaster is worth it, if just to experience the story and game again. If you have played neither before, at least familiarize yourself with the story of Chrono Trigger before playing through Chrono Cross. Overall, I had an amazing experience with this gem from the past, and it receives an 89 game score of 8 out of 10. Remember to watch for my story review of Chrono Cross, which should be up in the next few days, if you want detailed thoughts on the story. But until then, thanks for watching, and keep on gaming.